Recording. Awesome. So we're going to go ahead and start. Randy, thank you so much for coming here, and thank you so much for rescheduling.
No worries.
If you just wanted to introduce yourself a little bit, tell everyone kind of who you are, what you do, stuff like that.
Yeah, sure. My name is Randy Pease. My pronouns are he, him. And my current role has nothing to do with theater, but is tangentially related to education. I currently work at Teach for America here in Indianapolis. I work on 3 different teams there. I work in development and fundraising. I also work in alumni affairs, which is where we are working for development and engagement for Teach for America alumni, folks who have done the program. I'm assuming that you may have heard of Teach for America, given your proximity to Ball State's campus, where we do some recruiting. But if you haven't, I'm happy to talk more about it. And then I also work in operations. So I'm the office manager for a team of 15 who currently works virtually, and we do not have an office to manage. So it's kind of been an interesting life there. But the reason that I'm here is because, as Jake alluded to, if you were mentioning earlier, I am the former director of education at Indiana Repertory Theater, where I spent 5 years running their theater and education department. And then before that, I was a Teach for America Corps member. So I spent 5 years in classrooms in Indianapolis, teaching grades from 1st grade to 12th grade. And then I also spent time as a coach, coaching teachers in K to 12 education. So I have a background both as a classroom teacher, but my undergrad degree is in theater and performance. So I have kind of bounced back and forth between the worlds of theater and education for my entire career. So that's what I'm doing here. That's the very, very quick version. I'm not sure if we're going to do Q&A style or story time style, whatever we want to do. I'm just really grateful to be here, and I'm grateful for all of you and the work that you're doing up at Ball State for theater and education, because I think it's incredibly important work and incredibly fun work to do.
Thank you. It's really whatever is best for you. You can go ahead and tell us story time about how you ended up where you are. If anyone has any questions, you can put them in the chat or the little raise your hand emoji. But yeah, you could really just talk and we'll sit here and listen.
We'll do that, and then I'll open it up for some questions and advice at the end if you want to. I see folks coming on and off camera. Do you feel free to be on or off camera? I am used to it, working virtually 24 hours a day. So feel free to do what you need to do while we're going. And I've got the chat open. I can monitor questions in the chat as well. So I'll give you the sort of medium length version of sort of how I ended up where I'm at and what path I took to get there. Like I said, I went to school for undergrad for theater performance. I went to Indiana University Southeast, which is in New Albany, Indiana. It's a very tiny satellite campus of the big IU. We had 2 theater majors the year I graduated, so not a ton of opportunities coming out of that school. Whereas you guys at Ball State, you all at Ball State, you have a whole infrastructure of folks there looking for opportunities for you. So I encourage you to take advantage of that at every opportunity. I went to school for theater performance, graduated in 2006 with my degree. And from there, I went to Ohio. My first gig right out of college, about 2 weeks after I graduated, was to go to Ohio for summer stock theater. So all of you last 5 years fans, I spent a summer in Ohio. I did a play there called Tecumseh, where I played a frontiersman in a story about the Shawnee leader Tecumseh. It was a really interesting experience. We could have a whole other hour of me talking about just that summer and all of the things I learned to do and not to do in the world. But I finished that and came home to Indiana. And if you're not familiar with geography, New Albany, Indiana is just outside of Louisville, Kentucky. So I consider myself sort of from Louisville, if you know where that is. That's a dumb question. Of course, you know where that is. But there was actually a city there. I'm from a small town, but I'm not from the middle of nowhere. There was a city. Yay, Tucker. Awesome. Do you happen to be related to a Nathan Wheatley?
I don't think, not to my knowledge.
Okay.
But there are a lot of Wheatleys in that area.
There are. I went to college and elementary school with a Nathan Wheatley. Anyway, I came home and in Louisville, I decided to, with some of my friends from college and a professor, we started our own theater company. No one was doing the theater we wanted to do. So I started a found space theater company called Specific Gravity Ensemble in 2006. We worked for about 2 years there doing found space theater. Our premiere production was called Elevator Plays, in which we actually rented out the elevators of a skyscraper in downtown and performed shows inside the elevators as they moved up and down the building. So cast would be in the elevators, audience would get in, they'd travel to the top floor and watch a play. At the top floor, new actors would get in and they'd watch a different play on the way down. And we would do that in each of the different elevators to create a whole evening of sort of short plays, but all produced inside elevators. So that was the kind of work that I was interested in doing and what we were doing in Louisville. But I was only able to do that for a couple of years because in 2008, my wife was accepted into the Teach for America program and we moved to Indianapolis. And that's where we have been since 2008. We moved here and my goal was to sort of make a living as an actor. I thought Indy's a bigger city than Louisville. I'm gonna become a professional actor in Indianapolis and that's what we're gonna do. But in the mid 2000s, Kevin James had locked up every role in the country for fat, balding white friends. And so I had no opportunities to do that. I had worked a couple of paid gigs here in town. I did some corporate work for Lilly. I did some corporate work for the IU School of Medicine here in town. I did some really bad outdoor Shakespeare. I did some really mediocre community theater, but I was not able to pay the bills with my performances. So I got a day job as a substitute teacher here in Lawrence Township, Indianapolis, where I live now. And was doing that. That was my day job. I would work at the school during the day, and then I would at night go to rehearsals, go to auditions. During that time, I did some traveling theater out of Louisville with Blue Apple Players. If you're familiar with that group, I did a tour of Indiana and Kentucky in a show called Abraham Lincoln the Boy, in which Abraham Lincoln teaches a slave to read. Boy, it was terrible, but it paid some money. So I did a little bit of professional work on the side, but I realized one day after about 6 months of working at the school that I actually had stopped going to auditions. I had stopped looking for auditions, I'd stopped going, and I was actually finding myself really fulfilled with the role of Mr. Pease, playing that role of Mr. Pease at the elementary school that I worked at. My wife was in Teach for America at the time. She was completely 100% invested in the world of education and education reform. And so through her, I was learning a bunch about that world and was realizing that, like, you know what, actually, I think there is a different path for me. I had toyed with the idea of becoming an education major in college because I sort of listened to my dad once too often and panicked about what I was going to do with my theater degree. And so I had switched to education for a semester and promptly switched back the first time I took an ed psych class. I was like, no, I'm out. So Monday morning, I was an education major. I went to ed psych class. By Monday afternoon, I was back in theater classes for Tuesday morning. It was kind of a raw deal. But I had realized that I was wrong, actually. I was able to be creatively and sort of passionately fulfilled by education, by teaching kids. So I used that knowledge and sort of gave up the world of performance in 2010 and switched to full-time teaching. I stayed at my school. I started working on a postgraduate degree and decided that I didn't just want to go to school to be a teacher. I actually wanted to be a Teach for America teacher. And so I joined Teach for America in 2011. Teach for America is an alternative certification program that recruits that recruits college leaders and career changers to commit 2 years to teaching in high need schools in order to create lifelong advocates for urban education and equity in the education world. So I did that. I did that. I wanted to be an urban teacher. I wanted to teach kids of color. And then they placed me at a charter school here in Indianapolis that is not necessarily the most diverse in the world, but was a high performing charter school, a Heron High School. If you're from Indianapolis and you know the area, it's a very artsy fartsy school. It's very liberal. It's basically a liberal arts high school. And I taught there. And while I was there teaching high school history, which was not what I had set out to do, but what they placed me in, and I actually really loved it. I was teaching history, and through Teach for America, I happened to be in the right place at the right time to do a summer program at IRT, Indiana Repertory Theater, and Teach for America wrote a grant to partner up on their summer conservatory workshop. I'm going to mess it up and call it summer workshops because that's how I rebranded it when I worked there. But their summer conservatory program, which was an acting training program, what they did was they wanted to pair teaching artists with classroom teachers so that the classroom teachers could elevate the teaching of the teaching artists, and the teaching artists could add creativity into the teachers' classrooms. So that opportunity came up and I jumped at it because I was like, oh, I'm not doing anything else in the summertime. This is really good money. It's a grant, so they're just throwing money at people. That's the best thing in the world about grants, is it's just money that you have to spend. So they were spending that money on me. It was a chance to work on my teaching skills. It was a chance to work in theater again. And so I jumped at that opportunity. That was the summer of 2012. And it was an incredible opportunity. I worked so hard and worked with incredible people at Indiana Repertory Theater, met incredible kids, and spent 4 weeks there. And then that was it. I was like, hey, this was great. Loved it here. If you ever need anything, let me know. And went back to Heron, went back to teaching, but realized that I was one of the kids at my school was the daughter of the artistic director of Indiana Repertory Theater, which meant that my name was sort of on their mind. Whereas IRT wasn't on my mind, my name was on their mind. After my 2 years in Teach for America, I had intended to stay in the classroom for a long, long time and just become a classroom teacher. But Teach for America came calling and recruited me to join their staff. So I left teaching after 2 years and was recruited to become what they called then a manager of teacher leadership development, which meant I was a teaching coach. So I worked at Teach for America for a year as a teaching coach, working with teachers from grades K through 12, sort of on best practice in classroom management, best practice in pedagogy, culturally responsive teaching, how to take care of yourself, because it's hard in Teach for America. If you've ever heard anything about the program, folks didn't take care of themselves. And so I would have to be like, hey, did you eat today? These are things that we have to worry about as teachers in this country, which is a problem. But I worked in that. It was a very hard job, but it was very rewarding. But I was sitting there one day at work, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I got an email from the person who had been my supervisor at IRT. And they said, hey, I'm leaving IRT. You should call because you'd be great at my job. And I said, huh, okay, well, that's very nice of you. That's really great. And then about an hour later, I got an email from Janet Allen, the artistic director of IRT. And she said, Kara's leaving. When can you interview? And I was like, oh, okay. They really want me for this job. The thing about the IRT job, which I obviously accepted and went and interviewed for and got, was that I didn't know when I started my theater career that the job at IRT, the job of being an education manager at a theater, was a job that existed. I did not realize that there was a person in the world who did that job, and that there were people all over the country who did that job, who managed the educational aspect of a professional theater's operations. And when I did, I found a job that I really, really, truly enjoyed. So while I was there, I worked, my biggest, the bulk of what I was doing was actually sales, was actually just getting people to come see our shows. So through that, I managed to a budget of about $400,000 to $500,000 worth of sales a year for about 40,000 kids coming through our doors to see that, which is among sort of LORT theaters in the country, one of the 5 highest. It was one of the largest student matinee programs in the country, especially for theaters our size. I think only second to Florida Studio Theater as far as theaters that are LORT C theaters. So I managed that. I also managed our summer conservatory program, which was a 4-week summer acting intensive and a production intensive that sort of was a miniature theater camp. 4 weeks, and the sort of claim to fame of that one was we were not a theater camp where you actually came to put on a play. We were a theater camp where you came to build your skill as a performer. And Jake can talk more about that experience as a participant of it, and then as an intern. So Jake was a student at our theater conservatory, and then later came back as what we called our interns, who were sort of the camp counselors of our theater summer camp. And he was fabulous in both roles, and I'll brag about him forever. And all of his colleagues from Decatur Central High School. Riley just did a show at Butler, which was super cool. I saw promos for that. So anyway, did that for 5 years. And then because of finances, primarily, I decided that it was time to leave theater. I sort of had advanced as far as I was going to go at IRT. I was already on the senior staff. I was on the leadership team, and I had a second child, and knew that for now, with my wife still being a classroom teacher, that I was probably going to need to boost my earnings pretty quickly. And that's what took me back searching at Teach for America. If I hadn't gotten this job at Teach for America, I'd probably still be at Indiana Rep. I loved working there. I loved the people there. But at the time, I needed to make more money relatively quickly. And so I was looking for a few roles, but this Teach for America role was the only one that sort of spoke to me. So I kind of, on a whim, pursued it, and I've been happy with the choice I made to leave IRT. But it is a wonderful place. And I'm happy to be working back in the education sector again, even though it's nonprofit, not directly in schools. I'm happy to be back in the world of education and education reform, because I think both of those things are equally, both the arts and like working for equitable education for our students here in Indianapolis is something that's really important to me. And it's something I took into my work at IRT, focusing on trying to increase the number of kids from low-income communities, and particularly communities of color, coming to IRT to see our shows. There's the long version. I could go longer, I could go shorter, but that's sort of how I got here, in sort of bouncing back and forth between performance, education, and theater, and then the nonprofit world. So that's my story. I think the moral of the story to take away for me is, I'm going to couch this. I am a heterosexual, cisgendered white man, which means that the moral of my career trajectory has often been be in the right place at the right time. I did not go seeking out my first role with Teach for America. They sought me out because of the work that I was doing at the time. I did not go seeking out a job at IRT. They came to find me based on the work I had done for them in the past. This job that I currently have at Teach for America was the first job I applied for after college. I never applied for a job. I leveraged connections. I showed up and did the absolute best I could for everyone. Like I showed up with a smile on my face. I did the absolute best I could, and I followed those opportunities where they led. That's not as easy for everyone to do. And I recognize the privileges that sort of helped me be able to follow that path. At the same time, it's the only path I have. It's the only experience I've had, and it's the only way I know to make those connections work for you. So that's my sort of what I've learned in my career. The number one piece was show up on time, be early if you can, do the absolute best you can, say thank you, and get to be friends with the janitors. That's the number one. Do those things, and you will have the best opportunity to succeed and move forward in your career. So that's it. That's the end of story time with Randy. What else can we talk about? Because I need to take a drink. That was a lot. I haven't shared that story in a long time.
So for someone who's like interested or thinking about wanting to go into more of like that arts admin education director field, what kind of like things do you recommend to look for? Like, where should they be going to be preparing for this, and like how should they go about wanting to like get to that career path?
So it's hard for me to say one specific thing, because I bounced into it, right? I stumbled into it. One thing I think that everyone should be looking at right now is, if you're not already involved, AATE, the American Alliance for Theater Education. If you're not already looking at that organization and thinking about how you could participate in it, do that now. Because that is where academic theater lives in the country, both at a high school and collegiate level. It's a conference that I went to when I was working at IRT, and it's a tremendous organization that does great work. So AATE, American Alliance for Theater and Education, look into that organization. The second is start now talking to as many theaters. If you're thinking about theater education at not at the high school theater level, but at the sort of administrative level, is start researching your theaters. Start researching theaters in the places you want to live and the places you might like to go, and understand the theater landscape there. Understand where your union houses are, understand where your non-union houses are, understand the staffing that's there, and then take a look at the opportunities that you have to engage there. These are difficult jobs to come by because there aren't very many of them. It was one of the things that I learned and I sort of shared when I was doing the role at IRT. When I had my job at IRT, I was the only person in the state of Indiana with my job. There were no other LORT theater education directors. There were education directors at different theaters, but none were LORT. That made it different. League of Resident Theaters. I don't know if everybody's familiar with LORT. You probably are. I don't know what folks do and don't know. But LORT theaters, the like League of Resident Theaters, union houses, large scale, no one else had that role. So I was the only person in Indiana with that role. I never applied for it. I didn't even know it existed until I got it, right? So the more research you can do about what kinds of roles are available is really, really important. And then the final thing that I was going to say was, it's gone. I'll remember it later. But there was another piece. That's a great question, Jake. But like the more education you can do now to find the roles that are out there and talk to those folks, the better.
So if I know you don't really run the education, like you're at Teach for America now, and I'm not sure if the conservatory is still a thing right now or if it's going to be in the next couple of years. But say someone from Ball State is interested in that internship. When you were there, what kind of like things were you looking for when it came to interviewing those people that wanted to work there in the summer?
Yeah, that's the biggest question. Blake, I see your question in the chat. I'll answer that one after I talk about Jake's question as well. So when I was looking at interns for my team at IRT, the two things I was looking for were a sense of professionalism and respect and empathy for young people. Those were the two biggest pieces. And for me, professionalism was sort of defined as a person who is eager and coachable, not necessarily perfect, and a person who I could see myself getting along with. And as Jake can attest, the relationship between me and the interns was quite intimate. It was just the 7 or 8 of us as the entire team for conservatory. The teachers came and went, but me and the interns were like, we're in it together the whole time. So I needed people on my side who I knew were going to be active listeners, who were going to work hard, who were going to be able to problem solve. But also the outside of that sort of who do you need to be to work with me and for me, it was respect and empathy for kids. Jake, you'll remember a question from your interview. And my favorite question to ask folks was, I would always ask this question around, I would say, you come home today and you have a new roommate, and your new roommate is an alien. They've never been to Earth before. What is the first movie you show them and why? They've never seen a movie. What's the first movie you show them and why? There's a correct answer to that question. And the question is, any movie that takes into account the alien's experience. Not, I'm going to show them Beauty and the Beast because it's my favorite movie. That's a bad answer to that question. I'm going to show, the best answer I ever got to that question was, I'm going to show them Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Because if they're an alien and they've just come to Earth, they're probably not going to be here for a long time, and I want to show them how to make the most of their time while they're here. That question tells me that you have the experience of other people at the forefront of your behavior. So I think when I think of theater education, those are the two things I think like, and Jake, I'm going to brag on you and your friends at Decatur and your teacher whose name is escaping me because I need to come up with it right now and I can't, is I got that sense of professionalism. Miss Nickel, that's right. I got that sense of professionalism from her students, who they were there to learn, they were there to work, and they were there to lead. They were there to sort of exemplify what it meant to be a collaborative artist at that time. So for those of you who are looking to go into the education sphere and actually like do the teaching of theater, I would say those are the two things also that I would implore you to infer on your students, is a sense of professionalism, a sense of being able to work well with others, and a sense of empathy for the process and for the people that are involved in making theater. So that's that. Blake, I see your question. It says, can you explain what responsibilities you have in your role position? I want to, if you could come off mute or in the chat, would you like me to talk more about what I'm doing right now with Teach for America, or what I was doing when I was at IRT?
I think I'm interested in hearing both, but I was specifically talking about Teaching for America, just because I'm not very familiar with that myself. So I was just interested in that.
So Teach for America, that's great. I can do a little bit of both. Teach for America is a nonprofit organization, and we create a core of teachers every year that come out of college and out of career changing. And we have 50 different regions across the country where those teachers come and commit to teaching for 2 years in low income communities. That could be urban communities like Indianapolis. It could be rural communities like Appalachia. We also have folks who teach on Native American reservations in New Mexico and South Dakota. So that's the program that we do, is we get these teachers to teach in low income communities in areas of high need where teachers are not always found. While they're in the program, we infuse in them a strong sense of diversity, equity, inclusion, and working toward equity in education, as well as helping frame best practices and getting folks sort of, you're learning boots on the ground, you're learning teaching while you're teaching. It's a really great program, and I'd love to recruit anyone into it. If you're thinking about what to do after Ball State, Teach for America, I did the program, my wife did the program. It's a really incredible way to kickstart your teaching career, but also understand sort of the broader systems of inequity that affect our education program. Being a nonprofit, there is a lot of work that goes into sort of the organization itself. So I don't actually work directly with our core members. You know what, I say that's a lie. This summer, I'll actually be a diversity, equity, inclusion facilitator for our new core members, working on building identity in folks and understanding the role of equity and inclusion in the education system. So I'll be doing some of that work this summer with our new teachers. But what I do on a day-to-day basis is sort of threefold. One, I work for our fundraising department. So I sort of assist in grant writing. I don't write any grants myself, but I assist our grant writers in sort of with proofreading and strategizing around grants. I process all of our gifts. So there has to be someone, when someone gives us a check, there has to be someone that makes sure that check gets appropriately cashed, gets appropriately put into the right account for us to use, and gets that the person who sent us the check gets in a proper acknowledgement for their taxes. So I actually do all of our gift processing. So that's another piece of what I do for our development department. I also work in our office management, our operations department. So right now, we don't have an office. We moved out of our office when COVID hit, and we don't have one, so we all work virtually now. So what that means is I'm the person who, whoa, stray cat just ran across my yard. It was huge. Sorry, I got easily distracted. So because we don't have an office, I am the person who, if folks need office supplies at their house to do their job, I'm the person who makes sure that they get them. I manage our PO box. I manage our voicemail systems. I manage, and I'm currently managing the process of finding a new office to move into in the summertime. So I'm working with a real estate team, and I'm working with lawyers to make sure that we're getting an office that will meet our needs. So that's the operation side of what I do. And then the most exciting and most education focused part of what I do is I work on what's called our Network Impact Team, which works with Teach for America alumni. So one of the things about Teach for America that's really cool is that once you've completed the program and you've done your 2 years, you're now an alumni of the program. And you are poised to go use the rest of your career, whether it's in education or the private sector or the nonprofit sector. You're going to be positioned as you come out of Teach for America to do great things in the name of equity, no matter what career field you choose. So we believe that in order to end educational inequity in this country, you're going to need a broad and diverse coalition of people working in all sectors to close those gaps and to meet those needs and to create the policies that need to be in effect. So our network impact team works with our alumni in schools, in the private sector, and in the public sector to train, develop, help advance careers in order to get folks into positions where they are best equipped to make the educational change that we know needs to happen for kids, low-income students and kids of color in Indianapolis. So with that, I work on a team where we do events. We're getting ready to do a teacher appreciation event at Bottle Works where teachers are going to come and we're going to treat them to like cool swag and dinner. We're going to like do just some like cool celebrating of our teachers. We also do resume workshops for our core members and alumni looking to improve their resumes. We've done professional developments around DEI. We're doing interviews around our 10-year goal of doubling student proficiency in our city. So I get to actually engage with our alumni in that way. So it's a little bit esoteric and a little bit of, but that's the day-to-day of what I do. I wear 3 different hats in my role, all of which are focused in different ways toward ending educational inequity. At IRT, my day-to-day function was a lot of processing. So I did lots of processing of orders. Teachers would call in orders for tickets and I'd process those tickets and make sure they had everything they needed to execute a wonderful field trip. On the day of the field trip, I was just so much bus control, Jake. On the day of the field trip, as I liked to put it, it was a lot of just like event management, making sure that buses got where they needed to go, that kids safely got off the buses into the building, that they got into their seats safely, that they knew where the restrooms were, that they knew what their behavior was supposed to be, that they knew when the show was going to run, doing curtain speeches, being on the horn in case things went wrong. So that was always part of it. It was just like sort of managing field trips and events. When I wasn't doing that, I was making sure that I was collecting good data for our development department around who was coming to the theater, what they were doing there, what shows they were seeing. I managed our budget and our expenses. So making sure that day to day, we were making more money than we were spending. I worked on the senior staff team to help set strategic direction for the theater and making sure that student voices were represented in that as well. And then during the summer, when it was summer conservatory, as I liked to put it, if summer conservatory was a school, I was the principal, making sure that the teachers were hired, and the interns, which were also teachers, were working into doing what they needed to do, that all of the students' enrollment was in order, making sure that we had all of their medical forms on file, making sure that their bills were paid, and then more bus control in the afternoons and mornings, making sure that kids were able to be dropped off at our downtown location safely. So yeah, lots of focus on students and keeping them safe, which is the #1 priority for anyone working with kids. If parents are trusting them to you, you got to make sure they're going to be safe and cared for. It's a long answer to a short question, but yeah, lots of different duties in those roles.
Awesome, thank you so much.
No thanks, no worries, Blake. Did I develop the curriculum with the teachers for conservatory? That's a great question. The answer is sort of no, not necessarily. I worked with teachers to make sure that they were working on what they wanted to, but because of the nature of the conservatory we had, teachers had a lot of freedom to sort of teach what they were doing. What I was most responsible for was sort of setting the broad creative direction to say, we are not going to be doing a show, we are going to be skills oriented. So I want you to be making sure that like whatever you are working towards, the day-to-day action of your teaching is focused on developing performance skills. So at the end of this, if they haven't memorized a single line, I don't care. If they aren't doing any Shakespeare scenes, I don't care. If we're reading Shakespeare, we're learning about scansion. We're learning about the skills needed to do these performances. Parents, loved it. Parents loved getting to come see like what the performance was at the end, because you have to have a performance at the end or the parents will riot. They will never come back if you don't have a performance. But what our performance was literally activities. The teacher would get up and say, hey, we're going to do this activity, and this activity is designed to help free your voice and help your students find their projected voice. And then they'd stand up there and do Linklater and and whatever they had to do. The parents loved being able to see a glimpse of what their kids were learning during the day, because what our philosophy was if you make it about doing the play at the end is the only thing. We did a play. But if you make it about the process, it is what we learned along the way. And Jake can probably attest to that, both as a student and as an intern, that there was a difference in sort of what you took away from that summer, as opposed to the frantic sort of pulling it together of making a play at the end. So yes, I worked with them to set sort of vision, but the curriculum itself was run by our teaching artists. And I was sort of the arbiter. If teaching artists had questions about like, well, should I do this, or can I do this? I was the arbiter to say, I think you should go in one direction or another, but we let the teachers have freedom to sort of get to that end point in the way they wanted to. It's a great question. Other questions?
I was wondering what the teachers are like at RIT. Right?
IRT, Indiana.
Thank you. I was wondering what the teachers like. Obviously, you talked about the curriculum, but what does their day-to-day schedule kind of look like with the students?
Yeah, so that was a lot of my job, was creating a master schedule. So when our teachers were working, our teaching artists were working that summer, they were sort of on, the idea was that they were on for like 20 hours a week, and they were working, most of them taught an acting section, which was roughly 3 hours every day. And then they would also teach what we called PEs, or personal enrichments. So we had classes that were sort of like middle of the day classes where we would sort of teach whatever you wanted. And then they also taught what you could be generally thought of as electives, but were mandatory. So things like voice, movement. We had a dance and a musical theater component. We had a Shakespeare component. At some points we had a theater history component as well. So the teachers would have their sort of area of expertise, and they would teach both acting generally, which was focused on rehearsal skills and strategies and script analysis and things like that. But then they also had different sections on voice or movement, et cetera, et cetera. So they would teach about 20 hours a week. Usually mornings were the elective times where you'd have your voice or dance or whatever. And then the afternoons were big chunks of teaching time. Those classes were up to the teachers to structure, and often featured probably, especially at the high school level, what you would see in a 101 in your acting 1 classes at Ball State. It was very much structured in the way like that. I sort of remember my acting 1 classes being structured, a lot of exercises, a lot of script reading, a lot of short scenes, contentless scenes, things like that, going through those intro rehearsal pieces to sort of teach the how to think like an actor, as opposed to just being given a script and told what to do, and sort of just allowing your natural emotional process to do it as you might do in high school. I was in 10 plays in high school. I never took an acting class. I was just really emotional and good at that part of it. It wasn't until college that I learned how to think like an actor. So a lot of that coursework is teaching how to think like an actor. But yeah, it was about a 20-hour work week commitment, and most of our folks, in fact, I'd say 90% or greater, were actors first. They were performers first and teaching artists second. This was what they did during the summer when the theaters were dark. So most of them were performers first and taught like performers, which was why the IRT grant with Teach for America was so important and so cool, was that it brought in teachers to say, well, actually, let's think about this from a goal perspective. As a teacher, you're going to set your objectives, and you have the objectives that you want your students to learn by the end of your lesson plan. Well, that kind of thinking, that kind of design thinking and understanding by design was brought into our teachers. And it really made a difference in the way those teaching artists viewed the teaching process. So that's another long answer to your question. Hopefully I'm giving you insight on sort of what that role was like.
Yes, thank you. I do have another question.
Please.
So everyone, or mostly everyone in this room, are theater education students. So we're kind of teachers first, in a sense. But we do have a lot of people who are interested in teaching after like a musical theater degree or something like that.
Yeah.
From your experience, how do you think that helped you being a performer first versus if you were to go and be a teacher first?
The greatest role I ever played was Mr. Pease. The greatest role I ever played was being sort of pretending that I knew more about ancient China than my students on the day I had to teach about ancient China. This idea of like faking it till you make it. I don't think I ever faked it, but I definitely my skills as an actor and what I learned from being a performer in college helped me have confidence in teaching. I knew that I could capture an audience for 45 minutes to an hour, right, in my classroom. I knew that being a history teacher, that I was gonna have to lecture as a history teacher. And the greatest compliment I got from one of my supervisors at Heron when I was teaching there was they were like, you lecture too much. They said, you lecture too much, but it seems to work for your class. And I was like, good, because I don't know any better. And I'm really good at this part of it. I'm really good at just like getting up and I have my notes, right? I have my script for the day. I know the lesson I'm teaching. So it was very much the same set of skills. Your lesson plan is your script. Your students are your audience. Your goal is to impart that lesson to them, right? Your obstacle is their stupid teenage brains, right? And getting through those, right? The tactics are your pedagogy, right? So if you're thinking about goals, objectives, and tactics as an actor, that's the exact same strategy you would use as a teacher. Your goal is your daily objective for the lesson. Your obstacle is the students and the impediments and the questions that they may need. It's also the knowledge that they may or may not have that you have to give them in order to be able to understand and grok your lesson. And then your tactics are the pedagogy of how you're going to impart that on them. So to me, being an actor was the perfect preparation for being a teacher, at least for me, because it helped me structure the way I thought about teaching. Does that make sense? I think it was very it was one of those pieces where so here's an example. I'll share this story. It was one of my favorite things that happened while I was teaching. This was actually before I was a full-time teacher. But when I was working as a sub, I was what is called a building sub, which meant I went to the school every single day, whether there were teachers out or not. So I worked there every single day. If there were no teachers absent, then I would help out in gym class or go to the science lab and help there, or go to the library and help kids find books, just do whatever was sort of needed around the building that day. But I got to know lots and lots and lots of the kids. And so I was also a long-term sub. So if teachers were out for a long time, I got to actually take over their class for a period of time. So that happened one day. I had a class for a full week. And during that week, I was teaching the water cycle for science class. And I was trying to get them to understand evaporation. And they were like, we don't get it. The water's there, then it's not there. How does that work? And I'm like, there's fourth graders. And I'm like, the molecules are heating up. And they don't understand that. So I'm trying to get them to understand energy. And so what I leaned on was I'm in the front of this classroom. I've got 45 minutes to teach them about this, and they're not getting it. So I had to improvise. So I started trying to figure it out. I'm writing on the board. They don't get it. So finally, I looked over, and the teacher had a jar of marbles on her desk. And I picked up the jar of marbles. And I was like, okay. Thanks, Hannah. I appreciate you coming. I see she has the bounce. So I picked up this jar of marbles, and I was like, okay, there's a jar of marbles. I'm holding it right here. Each one of these marbles is a drop of water. Can you understand that? And they were like, yeah. Okay. So if I'm holding this right here, there's no energy in the marbles. They're standing still, right? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, so if they're water and the water is still and it's not moving, what does that make it? And they're like, ice, because we had talked about the different phases of water. I was like, great. Now, if I warm this up by putting energy in it, and I started moving the marbles around and shaking them in the glass, and they were like, I was like, so the marbles are like shaking in the glass. And I was like, so there's energy in this now, and they're no longer still, they're moving a little bit. What does that make them? Oh, it's water. Great. And so then I just started shaking the glass as hard as I could, and marbles are flying out of the glass across the room. And I'm like, there's a lot of energy. What's happening? And they're like, it's turning into steam. Their heads are exploding. That, I taught them that, like they learned that day. That was me literally, I had been in an improv group in college, right? That was me looking around and going, okay, I'm not getting through. I need to understand. I need to listen to them, listen to their questions, and understand what it is they're not getting and get through to them. That was improv. It was me taking a different tactic to get my point across to the group. So to me, the skills of acting and the skills of teaching are it's a really bad Venn diagram. They're almost circles on top of each other. So that's my question there. Tucker, I see you had a question in this section. So I'm going to give you a really bad answer to this question. So when I was hired at IRT, my whole job was just working with alumni and just doing the alumni facing work. This summer, Teach for America, because of COVID, had to lay off almost 3,000 or almost 300 folks. And not 3,000, that's a lot, but almost 300 folks. And over the summer, I was brought into my boss's office and said, hey, do you want a role where you work for the development department too? Or do you want no job? And I was like, I'll take the job where I work in development. I had and have no desire to work in fundraising. I don't like that part of my job. It's my least favorite part of the job. Fundraising is very difficult. It's very hard. My least favorite group of people in the world are rich white people. And I have to talk to them a lot and think a lot about what rich white people want and how to convince them to give us money to do what's right for poor Black folks, which is a really weird dichotomy to think about. But I do it. So I got involved with grant writing because last June I was told, hey, your new job is grant writing. And I've done it twice, so I have no expertise to offer. What I will say is that, especially in the world of theater lives and dies. The world of nonprofit theater lives and dies by its development professionals. The folks who are involved in raising money. At IRT, I think our annual budget at IRT was roughly $6 million for the entire year. For everything, all encompassing was about $6 million. Only about 3 million of that came from ticket sales. The other 3 million was fundraising every single year, raising that money. If you think that raising money for nonprofit arts organizations is something that you would like to do, you will find a job. The fundraising sector has incredibly high turnover. It's a very demanding role, but if it's something that you like doing and you think you could be really good at, I'd highly encourage you to think about what that means and think about how you could get involved in grant processing right now, and think about that. Practice writing grants for small things. Find a small grant that the Fed Club could write to do an activity, or bring in speakers who won't work for free. Think about how you could get a grant for something to do that and practice that skill set, because it's an incredibly important thing that they do. Your grant writers are your lifeblood. I spent a lot of my time at IRT making sure that what we did in the education department was accessible to our grant program, so that they could accurately talk about the kids we were serving and the programs that we were doing, so that they could convince folks to give us more money to keep doing more programs. So I don't have a lot of expertise in grant writing. I'm not super great at it. I'm still learning about it, but appreciate the question, because it's what I do now. So I'm working on getting better at it and learning more. Great questions.
Does anyone else have any questions?
So I know you work on like helping prepare these teachers to like go into like this teaching field.
Yeah.
With like, we have about like 8 minutes left. What do you like, in your opinion, biggest tip, biggest advice for someone stepping into the classroom for the first time?
Mhm.
A tip, a trick, just anything that you want to throw out there for a first year teacher.
Um, I'm going to give you a couple of pieces. The let me start. I'll start with the funny one. Earlier, I said make friends with the janitors. Make friends with the janitors. When you get into a school building, the people who run that school building, you have a principal, and their name is on the door. The people who run that school are the ladies at the front office and the janitors. This is like, if you can become friendly with the ladies at the front office and the janitors, your ability to navigate the politics of a school is very much improved. That's a little bit cynical, but I promise you, your life will be easier and you will enjoy your job more when the office ladies and the janitors are on your side. When you need something fixed in your classroom, the janitor is going to come to your room first if you're friends with them. So make friends with the janitors and the front office ladies. It's very cynical, but my God, I know that when I had the janitors and front office on my side, my life was a lot easier. Some more practical advice. You are going to fail in your first year much more often than you succeed. You are going to have lessons that bomb. You are going to have lessons that you have to reteach. You are going to have kids fail tests that you thought for certain they were ready to pass. You're going to fail more often than not your first year. Teaching is, but I will say, teaching is a science as much as it is an art. Teaching is a teachable skill. You can learn to be a good teacher. What you cannot learn is empathy for your students. What you cannot learn is respect for your students. That if you enter that room with empathy and respect for the young people that you are in charge of, the teaching will come. But if you're not there because you absolutely believe in the potential of every single one of your students, every single one, even Zach, who can barely read, and like every single one of them, they have something there that is worth investing in. If you can enter the room with that, and this is very philosophical, that is what can't be taught. When some people are like, oh my gosh, I don't have what it takes to be a teacher. You can. Everyone can. I truly believe everyone can learn the skills of being a good teacher. But the respect and empathy for your students, especially if you're going to go into something like theater, where you're going to be dealing with a bunch of misfits. We're all theater kids here. We know who we're dealing with, right? If you're going to be going into there where your job as a theater teacher is not just teaching theater, but actually helping kids literally understand how to navigate the world around them, and thinking about like the prevalence of queerness in theater, and the fact that you're going to be helping kids that like literally find their identities, like that responsibility. My God, if you don't have the basis of respect and empathy for your kids, it's not going to work. The teaching will come. You're not going to enter the room on day one and crush your lessons. It's just not going to happen. But if you enter day one ready to crush your relationships with kids and parents, then it's going to come for you. So those are my two biggest pieces of parting advice.
Thank you so much. Does anyone have any like last minute questions or anything?
Last minute, I'm excited. Thank you guys for having me come in and talk today. It's been really, really fun. Jake, it's great to see you again. It's great to know what you all are doing up there at Ball State. I love that campus. I love what you all do there. Thank you.
Thank you for talking with us. That was really helpful. If no one else has anything to say, thank you again. We really appreciate you coming.
Appreciate being here, Jake. Thanks for asking me to come.
Of course, if anyone has any information about wanting to possibly become a part of Teach for America, where should they go for that?
You should start at teachforamerica.org. And if you want to know more about specifically Indianapolis, you can go teachforamerica.org/Indianapolis. And then if you have other information, Jake, you can feel free to pass along my email address. If you have other questions, feel free to email me. You know where to find me now. If Jake will pass along my stuff. Actually, I'll go ahead and just type it here in the chat if we want. You can reach me at my personal email for any questions you might have. Is rainydangopease@gmail.com. That's me. So appreciate it. Just check out teachforamerica.org. There's probably a recruiter on your campus, wherever the education school is. If you're there, take a look. I don't know how much we recruit on Ball State's campus. Some campuses are friendly to Teach for America, and some campuses are like, we do things the traditional way. We don't love Teach for America. It happens. We're an ed reform organization. That's what happens when you do that. So, but if you ever have any questions, you know where to find me.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you. You all have a great week.
Thank you.
You too.
Take care.